Ah, the venerable twist ending. Nothing can pull a classic horror together or tear it to shreds quicker than one last-minute twist of the tale. Some of the best films in the genre hinge on a genius twist ending, such as Scream's shocking killer reveal or Sleepaway Camp's dated final shot. Even more recent genre efforts, such as Jordan Peele's Us, have made use of the twist to reinforce their running themes and deepen the preceding story, casting a dark shadow over everything that has come before. Then there are these twists, which add about as much value to their films as hiring T.J. Miller to play a comedic relief and make as much sense as Lars von Trier helming a Pixar film. Now, it needs to be noted that when it comes to the strict rules of cinematic realism horror, like sci-fi and fantasy, it is allowed to be a little more credulity-stretching than, say, Marriage Story. So with that in mind, here are some twists that even with their own established realities made not a lick of sense and derailed with the otherwise alright flicks which preceded them. I'm Sean Ferrick for What Culture Horror, and here are 9 horror movie twists that made no sense. Number 9, Drag Me to Hell. This one stings, because a sudden slap in the face bit of cruelty is as classic a horror movie ending as the supposedly dead killer opening his eyes to prove he's not quite vanquished and provide one more scare. The ending of Sam Raimi's darkly funny 2009 return to the familiar terrain of horror comedy could have been brilliant, as it befits the roller coaster tonal wavering of the preceding flick. Besides, the movie came out a year after the financial crisis. Who didn't want to see a young banker dragged down to the depths of hell and torn to pieces by fiery demons for repossessing a little old lady's house? The problem is, it doesn't make sense within the film's own established rules. Just how did Christie miss that the envelope she crammed into poor old Mrs. Ganush's final resting face wasn't the right one? Why did her boyfriend keep such a rare and supposedly interesting coin in an unmarked envelope rather than labelling it? It seems that the work of digging up a grave in the pouring rain, then prying open a coffin and a dead body's jaw were easy compared to keeping track of the cursed item which Christie's immortal soul relied. Maybe she deserved to be dragged down for the sheer incompetence, come to think of it. Number 8, Scream 2. Look, we all love tearing apart Aaron Kruger's sloppy screenplay for Scream 3. Even the iconic Nightmare on Elm Street Helmer and series co-creator Wes Craven couldn't salvage the mess of contradictions and gaping stab wound-sized plot holes which plagued that flick, though he did salvage the franchise's good name with the belated follow-up, Scream 4. But as much as we love Calvin Williamson's witty, innovative writing in the first 2 films in the series, a rewatch of Scream 2's ending is pretty undeniable proof that the franchise struggled with believability long before Roman's arrival. It's one thing to discover that movie geek Josh is behind the killings, even though this twist is about as believable as Timothy Olyphant playing said geek. But when his co-conspirator is revealed, things start to unravel faster than the guts of one of Ghostface's unfortunate victims. Did no one keep an eye on mass murderer and teen heartthrob Billy Loomis's mum after he was caught slaughtering dozens of people? Was there not much as a little Where Are They Now piece in the local paper about her a year after the killings? Apparently not, since she had the time to rearrange her face and pick up a new name, both of which meant it would be completely impossible for viewers to guess who she was, other than Sheldon Cooper and Lady Bird's mum, that is. Number 7, My Bloody Valentine 3D. Scream editor Patrick Lussier is a horror veteran, and as far as inevitable remakes go, My Bloody Valentine was a pretty harmless flick to revisit. Aside from providing a name for the best shoegaze band of all time, the 1981 original had little to recommend, and the film had no fondly remembered legacy to upend the way, say, fellow nuts remakes Halloween and Friday the 13th had. So it's all the more frustrating that after a string of surprisingly impressive and inventive gruesome kills, the movie takes the most obvious route in its closing scenes. The killer this time around is, surprise, our nominal protagonist rather than his best mate, and he still somehow survived a mine collapse and being blown to bits by an exploding fuel canister. So far, so predictable. But how did our hero and later villain Tom know where to look for the body of Harry Warden, the previous spree killer whose string of murders set the plot in motion? The story hinges on him finding Warden's body, but doesn't offer any explanation as to how he found it, or even how he could hope to know where it was. Guess we can chalk this one up to Tom relying on his actor, Supernatural star Jensen Ackles, having some experience tracking down supernatural spooks. Number 6. Shrooms. Following a group of insufferable students as they head to rural Ireland to trip on the titular magic mushrooms, the film could have been a fairly standard teen horror if it weren't for the unbelievably dumb turn taken by its closing reels. Yes, in time-honored tradition, the film reveals that the hooded menace behind the film's killings is not a demonic monk or any paranormal threat at all, but rather our very heroine, who's so out of it on the eponymous psychedelic that she doesn't remember slaughtering her mates. What she does remember, however, is a series of elaborate set pieces in which her fellow travelers are murdered by a lank-haired ghostly figure plucked straight out of the then waning J-horror craze. So is our heroine just inventing these scenes to justify her delusions? If so, how did she actually kill her friends? And why did her mushroom adult mind find the need to conjure up such a specifically slasher movie style demise for each of them? Number 5. Gothica. Poor Halle Berry. Between this dud, shockingly shot by accomplished French auteur Matthew Kassovitz of La Anne fame, and 2007's risible Bruce Willis psycho thriller Perfect Stranger, it's almost as if she's dedicated her career to not great twists. At first, this horror thriller, in which a psychologist played by Berry finds herself committed to the asylum she used to work in after the mysterious murder of her husband, seems solid. The flick even boasts an impressive supporting turn from Robert Downey Jr. on the cusp of his career revival. However, the story soon takes a turn into places both tasteless and pretty preposterous, a risky combination to say the least. Who let anyone send Berry's character into the same asylum she worked in, and who let her room with her own former patients? The ending offers an answer, but not one you'll like. Gothica's last-minute turn, wherein we discover that local Sheriff Ryan was the co-conspirator of Berry's late husband in an elaborate and impossible-to-cover-up decades-long murder spree, hinges on no one guessing that an angry cop played by American Horror Story star John Carroll Lynch might actually be the bad guy, not to mention the fact that Berry was possessed by one of their victims' ghosts in order to off them. The less said about the logic of that, the better. Number 4. Surveillance. So, a lot of you probably won't recall this one, since director Jennifer Lynch is relatively obscure even for horror fans, unless we have any boxing Helena heads in the audience, but best not hold our breath. Surveillance is a grimy, gritty thriller from the reigning king of unsettling weirdness, David Lynch's auteur daughter, which follows a pair of cops trying to uncover the truth behind a chaotic killing spree which has occurred days earlier. The film's story is gradually unveiled through a series of Rashomon-style flashbacks as the cops interrogate the only witnesses left behind. An intriguing setup, wouldn't you say? Any number of twists and turns could come from this classic premise, or alternatively, the film could reveal that the cops themselves are behind the killings, meaning they were investigating them for the sake of reliving the thrill, revisiting the crime scene immediately after the fact and risking being recognised, providing a nonsensical twist to an otherwise nasty and unremarkable indie flick. Number 3. Shut In. This twist somehow managed to show up in a pair of major studio horrors in the same year, and although it didn't play particularly well in either iteration, we've singled out Shut In for stretching credulity well beyond any reasonable suspension of doubt. Okay, so spoilers for The Boy and Shut In. The unseen supernatural presence plaguing our beloved protagonists is actually a very much alive human who is secretly using the crawl spaces within the walls to sneak around the house. Sure, The Boy was pretty silly, but its twist at least made sense within the film's established reality, but the Naomi Watts starring thriller Shut In has no excuse. Late in the flick, the audience discovers that her paralysed son Stephen is actually fully mobile and behind all the spooky going-ons of the preceding film. How did he manage to convince a cadre of doctors that he was suffering locked-in syndrome, whilst also managing to avoid detection as he snuck around the house and drugged his dear mum to convince her she was losing her mind? Good question. If you ever come across an answer, we'd love to hear it, since Shut In didn't feel the need to provide any. Number 2. Dead Silence. Dead Silence follows Jamie, whose wife has been murdered by a possessed ventriloquist's dummy as he tracks down the evil ventriloquist trying to end his bloodline. It's scarier than it sounds, trust us. At least, most of the movie is scary, with the spooky dolls and creepy atmosphere showing hints of one's promise to come, but the flick's twist is a mess which we can't sign off on, even if The Conjuring still keeps us awake after every rewatch. After vanquishing the evil Mary Shaw and her army of creepy dolls, Jamie discovers that human bodies can be used as ventriloquist dummies too. So it transpires that half of the film's cast were actually, bear with us here, ventriloquist dummies being piloted by a vengeful ghost. How Jamie didn't notice everyone around him had been dead for some time is impossible to know, but obviously he wasn't the brightest hero in cinema. Number 1. Joyride. A wholly unexceptional knockoff of Spielberg's classic TV movie Duel, Joyride is mostly noteworthy for setting off a string of backseat set car chase horrors of varying quality in the noughties. However, unlike later highway horror shows Dead End and Reeker, Joyride lacked anything resembling surprise when its twist ending came to a clanking, wheezing halt. The flick sees a trio of unlikable students play a prank on an unseen trucker voiced by Ted Levine, which can only end well, and it goes about as well as you'd expect, with the triumvirate narrowly avoiding death at the hands of a complicated rolling truck crushes motel room gambit. Problem is, the last second on the film reveals that the trucker has evaded the authorities on the account of propping up a dead body in the driver's seat. Clever. And as for the hostage lying in the passenger seat, well, she apparently didn't notice this, or just didn't think to mention it at the time. Understandable, maybe she thought his plan was already too convoluted and didn't want to poke an open plot hole. The flick was scripted by J.J. Abrams, so if nothing else, at least we know he's gotten better at setting up twist endings, as Lost famously proved.